Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my top 10 books of 2022 and I'm excited to share these with you. So if you like this kind of content and other homeschool content, please remember to subscribe and let's get into it. Okay, as you can see here, there's way more than 10 books. The reason is some of them are by the same author, so I was just going to show you all of those. There's a few that are human development that I kind of clustered together, and then there was a couple that I couldn't decide on number 10, so I just picked two because I didn't have really a 10th one that just stood out to me. So that's why there's way more than 10 right here, but let's start talking about these books. Okay, so there's not really a particular order to these. They kind of are in order of when I read them throughout the year, starting in like May-ish, because I didn't read a whole lot besides like fluff on my Kindle because I had a baby and I just didn't have time and it was easier to read my Kindle. And the human development books, I think, are really the only ones that are kind of in a cluster. And so they're not at the time I would have read them in the year. And so that's kind of how we're going to go through them, is just the way I listed them. And that's how I'm going to share them with you. So the first one is A Brilliant Night of Stars and Ice. And this is about the Titanic. And I've read a lot of books about the Titanic. A lot. Like, I've read several. I don't know if a lot is a good description. And I really have liked all of them. This one is told more from the perspective of the Carpathia, which is the boat that ends up rescuing those people that were still in the water from the Titanic. And I just thought it was interesting. Obviously, I knew some about the Carpathia before this book, but this goes into it a lot more and talks more about the captain and I think he's a really strong Christian and how that plays into everything. So I just really liked the perspective of this book, which is why it was one of my favorites for the year. Okay, so book 2 and 3 are more like church-oriented books. And some of that's because I started going to a church book club this year, and some of it's just because I started reading more church-oriented books. And this first one my husband actually got for me because it talks about attachment theory. So it's filled with his love and it's about strengthening your attachment with God and with others. And when he saw it was about attachment theory, and since I studied human development, he's like, oh, I'm gonna get that for my wife. And I just thought it was very nice of him and very sweet. So I really like this book and how it goes into the different attachments and how we can see what our relationship with God looks like through studying these attachments. So that was really fun. And then the next one I think we did do for our church book club, but it's The Law of Love by Steve Young. And this is a really good book. I just really loved the focus on looking more at the person instead of all the things that you're gonna get from it. You know, and in his career, he had to remember that, you know, he's out there to win games and win football and all these different things, but he also needed to remember there's people behind all these things. And when we can humanize someone and see them as a person, it's a lot easier to love them and realize we're all imperfect and we're all struggling to do what God wants us to do. Okay, these next two books I read because I went to an event. It's called Time Out for Women, and it had these two speakers. And these books they're both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they're not necessarily directly written to that audience. There's a lot of different people that could read them. So the first one is by Eric and Emily Orton, and this is 7 at Sea. And this is just a really fun book and inspiring. So they lived in New York and they decided they wanted to go live on a boat as a family for, I think it was almost a year. And so they buy like a boat unseen. I think it was down in St. Martin, and they go down there and it's a mess, you know. It's all this like learning curve. He had a little bit of sailing experience, but it was still, you know, a massive learning curve. And it just documents their experience, like the good things, the bad things, the very ugly things. You know, some of the horrible storms they were in, just everything that could have been absolutely terrifying. And I'm sure it was terrifying at the time. But I just really love it. And I love how it inspires us. We don't have to do this specifically, but to try things, like to do things that we think are fun. You know, just because someone else doesn't think it's fun or that it's something they aspire to doing doesn't mean that you can't do it. And I just think that was really cool about this book. The other one is Better Than Happy, and this is by Jody Moore. She also has a podcast. I haven't ever listened to it before, but she is like a life coach, I think is what you call it. I get confused with all the coaching. I don't know which ones are which. But she's a life coach, and she goes through a lot of your brain process of your thoughts, and how your thoughts are what dictate your emotions. And when I listened to her in person after I read this book, she talked about like coming home and your house is a mess. Like she's like, after this event, you're gonna go home and your house is a mess, which wasn't the case for me. My husband's really good at keeping it clean. But for some people, right, it might have been a huge mess. And your husband will look at it and he's just like, it's not a mess. But you look at it and you're like, it's a mess, because your thoughts are dictating your emotions and they're different than someone else's. And so it's important for us to realize that, you know, because the way we're responding, sometimes we're like, oh, they should get this. Why aren't they getting this? Or why are my kids not understanding why I'm so angry? And it's because my thought went and dictated my emotion, and their thought is dictating a different one. And so we need to understand we view things, we see things differently, and then it allows us to control them, or at least to think through them and be like, okay, why is this happening to me? So I really liked it. This book is full of just the thought process. There was one, I just passed it, but it goes through the circumstance, the thought, feeling, action, and result. She has tons of them in here. And I just think it's very helpful, because then it like gives you some real life experiences of how to apply what she's teaching you. Okay, so the next book that I read that I really enjoyed is French Kids Eat Everything. And this was just a really fun, good book. It opened me up to a different culture. I've been to France, but obviously being there once for 10 days doesn't teach me a whole lot. But reading about this, it was just really cool to understand their culture a little bit better. It's about a family that lives in Canada, but the husband is French, and they decide to move back to France for a while, and he lives in a very small town in the country, and how their two little girls are very picky and just getting used to the culture. And she gives you some recipes at the back, just some very simple recipes for trying different things. And basically by the age of 2, it says kids in France have tried so many different foods, so many different foods. And so they basically will eat anything, and they have a very healthy relationship with food. Okay, it's like a whole thing to have a French meal. It's hours and hours, you spend time together, you talk, and it's just, you're eating a lot and a lot of different kinds of foods, but they're very, very healthy and like skinny and all these things, just because they have a really good relationship with food. So I just really like this book. I thought it was great. And I tried some of the recipes. I fed them to my baby. And so I think it's a really good book, especially if you want like insights into another culture. Okay, the next one is another church book, and it's called Original Grace. And I really like this book. So this is off the idea of original sin, if you're familiar with that. So we believe, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that the fall of Adam and Eve was like a progression forward. And I know that's different than almost all other Christianity. And so this book is talking about that, basically, and how even as members of my church, we still forget that. We forget that it was this progression forward, this opportunity for us to learn. And it goes through so many different examples. It's very deep. It's one of those books you could read over and over and over again and still like not learn anything and learn everything at the same time, because it's just so complex. There's just so much to learn from it. So I just wanted to mention it again because I really enjoyed it, and I really want to go back through it and continue learning from it. Okay, so the next 4 books are all human development books. And so these 3 are all by the same authors. Okay, so it's Daniel Siegel and Tina Bryson, I believe are their names. But so this is The Whole Brain Child, and then you have The Power of Showing Up and No Drama Discipline. That's actually, I think that's the order I read them in. And I feel like No Drama Discipline, this is the one I read most recently, I liked the most. I feel like it just had a lot of stuff I could apply to me. It talks about the whole brain child in this book. And so if you want to just read one, I would pick this one. And it doesn't go into it as in depth as this one. So if you want, even after reading this, if you want a like deeper understanding of it, you could go and read The Whole Brain Child. If you just want like an overall idea of what they teach basically throughout all their books, but slightly differently, then read this one. And I think they're all great. And they're very easy to read for just normal people. And they have lots of pictures. So that makes you go through them faster. And then the other one I wanted to mention is Raising Good Humans. And this is another one I want to go back through, and I haven't had a chance to do it. But it basically goes through emotions, like talking through our emotions, understanding where our emotions are coming from, and teaching our kids like it's okay to have those emotions and we need to talk about it. And I just thought it was a really good book. It is the most effective when you are taking notes or you're answering the questions, because there's a lot of like reflective type stuff in this book. And so that's when it's gonna be the most effective and you're gonna learn the most from it. The next 3 books are all by the same author. They're by Susan Meisner, and The Nature of Fragile Things we read for book club a few months ago. And then I found out she had other books. And so I read these. I still have one more to read from her as well. And I don't feel like I have a favorite. So I have The Nature of Fragile Things, Secrets of a Charmed Life, and A Fall of Marigolds. And they're all different. Okay, this one's talking about the earthquake in San Francisco in the early 1900s. This one's talking about the London Blitz during World War II. I can't talk. And then this one is between, not quite 9/11, it's like after 9/11, but reflecting a little bit on 9/11, and then also 1911. And immigrants coming into Ellis Island and kind of what that experience was like. And so that was cool because I really didn't know a whole lot about that. So this was the most recent one I read, but I feel like they're all really good. If you just want like a good historical fiction that is different, like she always has some sort of like mystery going on, and not in a like scary suspenseful way, but just a good mystery going on. And it's usually flashing between a few different time periods. And I just really liked them. I just thought they were so good, and I'm excited to read the other one I have. Okay, and then number 10, at least hopefully that's what we're on, because I'm at the last 2 books. But I couldn't decide between these 2. I feel like neither of them was one that was like, this is one of my super favorites, but they also were not my favorite, if that makes sense. Like I liked them both, but it wasn't like, oh yes, I'm gonna read these again or totally recommend them or something like that. I'd recommend them. But I just wasn't as in love with them, I guess, as some of the other books. But out of the books I read this year, these would have been my favorite. So Raven Black is a mystery, and it's a slower moving mystery, and it's not super scary or suspenseful. So it's a murder mystery, but it's not anything super crazy. So if you don't really like reading like mystery or suspense or scary books, this might be a good book for you to read. It's, like I said, it's a little slower pace, and it has a good mystery to it, but it's not like super scary and you're gonna like jump out of your chair and not want to read it at night because you're gonna never go to sleep. And so I really liked it. I thought it was very, very good. And then the other one that was unique was Lovely War. And this one, when I reviewed it, I was like, I don't even know quite how to explain it, but it's flashing between like Aphrodite, like some Greek gods, and was it World War II? Now I can't even remember. Maybe it was World War I. Yeah, I think it's World War I. And a couple during that, like some different people, not just a couple, like some different people during that time period. And it's just very different, like having this perspective basically of God looking down and kind of moving the pieces. Okay, but it's doing it with God, like Greek gods. Or Roman, whatever those names are. Anyway, and so they're just looking down and kind of moving the pieces, and they're on trial and telling the story. Aphrodite's telling a story of how she got some people together and stuff like that, and it's just interesting. It's just very different. It's interesting. It's easy to follow. And I thought it was really good and fun. It was just different than other books that I've read. Okay, so those were my top 10-ish books. That's how this video always goes. It's 10-ish books for 2022. I hope you enjoyed these. I hope they gave you maybe some ideas, some things you could put on your book list for this next year, for 2023. And if you have book suggestions, please put them down below. I know I say that every single time, but it really is so helpful for me. And I love your guys' book suggestions. And remember to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.